Alright, in this video, this is going to be the third animation if you have been following this little series of animated path videos. In the first video I did, we did the square following this path here. About a week ago I did this red gradient tutorial that you will see popping up right here in a moment once this square gets back. There it is right there. And now in this, I guess you can say final piece of the tutorial, we will look at this blue animated path here. Now there are going to be two presets that I have in my free wallpapers folder now. The one that you saw at the very beginning of this tutorial is going to be this one right here. Let me just show you the name. It is going to be Follow a Path Complete. That's going to have the blue animated curve, the square on the path, as well as that gradient piece I showed you a moment ago. And now check this one out. This is the one that I'm going to use to kind of show you a top-down view of how this path works. So you can also look for Curved Animated Path Tutorial. Both of these are in my free wallpapers folder. Now I'm going to load that wallpaper up there and I'm going to save this and apply it to the home screen. And this is a top-down view of how that animated path is working. Now some things I want you to notice here. I have like a yellow curve, I have a blue curve, I have this red curve, there is a green one back there, and then there's this purplish curve and then this orange curve. I kind of have it matching up with these rectangles. Notice here, so back to the beginning, I had this white one here, and then this yellow one comes into this yellow rectangle. The blue goes into the blue, the red goes into the red. We can't see the green, it's behind the magenta color. There's the magenta and there's the orange. All right. So what's really going on here? I really just have a bunch of circle slices here, and these circle slices are getting clipped, and these rectangles are serving as the clipping regions. Now, using complex animations, ultimately what's happening, this red one, for example, notice this red is not in the rectangle. Ultimately, right now, you won't see this red curve. This is the clip region. Now you will see it once we apply our clips and all that good stuff. Now speaking of clips, so let's go ahead and start applying these clips so that you can see how this curve will be drawn. Let's look at the yellow one. The yellow is inside of that rectangle right now, but if I actually come to that yellow rectangle, we have a red border around it. I don't want to see that yellow unless it's inside of that rectangle like it is right now. Go to head on over to FX for that rectangle, Mask, Clip Next Module. And the next module that I have for that rectangle is what I've called 182. I've called it 182 because technically this yellow one that we have here is the second slice that I've added. This was my first slice, second, third, fourth, the green is my fifth, purple is my sixth, and this orange one that we just saw bounce back and forth is our seventh. So now I'm going to come to every single shape that I have in here. Now I'm at this blue square, FX, let's clip next module, and I'm going to do this for all of the others. Let's save that and apply it. And now you can see that unless that shape is inside of that rectangle, take that red one. Technically that red one is over here, that red circle slice, but since it's not in that red rectangle that we've applied the clip to, we don't see it until right about now. And the way we get these things to line up perfectly is to use complex animations and to use our percentages of our complex animations correctly. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a quick setup of creating the path and applying a few of these clips and using those percentages correctly. To start off in a blank preset, I'm going to add a circle slice. For that circle slice, I'm going to give its width. Be careful, don't make it too wide. Let's try 300. I'll keep the height at 20 just so you can see the thickness of that slice very nicely. And until you get the hang of this, I recommend using increments of 90 both for your angles and your offsets when we start rotating these things. Now for that circle slice as well, to create something similar to what I had at the beginning, I just come down here to my rotation and I set it to manual, and since we know that we want increments of 90, I want this one to be, well, luckily I got it right there at 180. And let's slide this on over to the right to where this little piece here is right on the edge of our screen. So right around 360 looks good. And I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to slide it down just a little bit, maybe around 40, because we're about to create another little curve right here. And I'm calling this one my 90 curve. This one's going to be a 180 curve. But before I come in here and name those, let me just copy and paste. Now I'm going to name this 91 because it's my first shape and it's a 90-degree bend. And for this second shape, even though we haven't changed it yet, I'm going to call it 182 because it's my second shape and I'm actually going to use 180 degrees. Speaking of that, let's go into that 182. Let's set the angle to 180. Let's go over to the position and let's zero out the X offset so that we can see it. That looks good. I did not change my Y offset, but coming back to that shape, let's go down to the offset here and let's rotate this to where we have an increment of 90, in this case 270. And the reason why I'm picking it in this direction is because now I want to take this circle slice and line this up with that right there. A quick way to do that, since we are directly en route, is we can go over to the X offset and just move it on over. And that should be pretty good. If you use nice numbers for your widths and your thicknesses and whatnot, these offsets should work out pretty nice as well. And now you may notice that this path is looking smaller, and the one I originally made, it went way over here. So a quick fix for that, let's go back to the 91. Let's just make the width. Let's go up to something, say 400. Now the position at 360 is still fine. Maybe we need to slide this down just a little bit more. We just don't want our path going off the screen up here. So that was our 91. Let's come into that 182. Let's bump that width up to 400. Now for our position, we need to slide it over to the left some. And remember, we did adjust that Y offset some more, so I have to bump it down, and that looks good. And just with those two adjustments, now we have a bigger path that comes over here farther to the left side of our screen. So back into root, let's take 91. I'm about to create another 90-degree bend, and I'm going to call this 93 since this is our third circle slice. Heading into that circle slice, going over to its position, let's zero out the X offset just to see it. And all we got to do is slide it over to the left a little bit. Perfect. Now for this next shape, we want a 180 piece. That was that red one that I had earlier. And I'm going to copy this 182. Copy and paste. I'm going to name this 184 since it is our fourth circle slice. Heading into that circle slice, let's go over to position and let's center this in the middle of the screen. However, I want to take off that Y offset so that it is centered in the Y axis, so to speak. The X offset will probably be okay. Maybe we'll have to move a few things, no big deal. Let's head back over to the shape for this 180 piece and let's set this offset here to 0. And what I don't want to do is I don't want to position the Y value to where it comes up here. Totally fine if you wanted to, but what I want to do is I want to keep this slice centered in the middle of the screen, at least along this horizontal axis here. And a way to preserve that is to come into the width of that circle slice and let's just adjust it to where it does meet up. Again, these numbers are working out real nice here. Now we pretty much want to duplicate this top part to this bottom part. And since we had these names so nicely, this was 91, 182, this is 93, so I want to go grab my 93, copy and paste it, and check this out. Of course, I'm going to call this 95, that's not the little tip here, but if we go into this 95, go to its position and set it to the bottom. Check it out, it's at the bottom. All we have to do is come in here and adjust that offset, and now all I have to do is come in here and adjust this offset that you see. And an increment of 90, that would be 270. Perfect. Backing out of here, going back to that 182, that was this one up here. Let's copy and paste it. Going to call this 186 for our 6th circle slice. Heading into that slice, position, set it to the bottom. And now we just need to adjust that offset. Now make sure you adjust the offset and not the actual angle itself. But moving it somewhere around there, an increment of 90, so that will be exactly 90 degrees. And then we have one more piece to copy over. Heading back up to 91, copy paste, and calling this 97 for our 7th circle slice. Take its position, set it at the bottom, and now we just want to set this to where it's right here. Adjusting that offset, increment of 90, 270, that's perfect. Let's save it and have a look. So this path is very similar to the one that I showed you at the beginning. It's clearly thicker than the original path, but I just wanted you to see this better for tutorial purposes. All right, now let's start animating this thing, and we are going to use some rectangles and or squares with some clips, but for this first one, this 91, we just want it to animate like this onto the screen. We don't need a clip for that since it's going to appear to come off of the screen. And heading into that 91, for the animation, let's go ahead and add one. And for that animation, let's set it to loop. For the action, let's set complex animation. And before we dive into that animation, let's look at the number of 90-degree turns we have on this path. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There are 10 90-degree bends, if you will, on this path. And since they're 10, and since complex animations involves percentages, let's let each 90-degree curve part represent 10% of our animation. The only minor downside to that is this. Since this part, this 90-degree bend here and here, it's a bigger width, our circle slice was bigger, it will be slightly faster when it animates along this part of the path. Everything else will remain uniform, but it's not very noticeable. Maybe you didn't even notice it at the beginning of the animation. Now, if you want a completely perfect uniform animation, you're going to have to use a little bit of geometry, like with circumferences of circles and stuff like that. But to keep things simple, since we have 10 90-degree bends, I'm going to use 10% for each 90-degree bend. And now back to this complex animation, let's set our ease to straight with return. And inside our animator, at 0%, we actually want this 91, this 91 that we named, we actually want it to be rotated off the screen, and we want it to rotate 90 degrees onto the screen. And you have to play around with either positive 90 or negative 90. Let's try negative 90 for right now, keeping the ease at straight. And then at 10%, we want it to animate onto the screen to its original position, so to speak. So at 10%, let's set the rotate to 0. Now, if this is in the wrong direction, quick fix. So let's go ahead and add that and see what happens. All right, it's doing exactly what it should do. And I tell you what, before we go any further, let's go ahead and back out of here and let's add a global for our duration. Number global will be fine. And I'm going to go ahead and set that up to maybe, let's just start with 4 seconds. So setting the duration to 40. Heading back into 91, animation, inside that complex animation, let's set that global to GVDir. Now this is going to slow things down a little bit, but I do want you to notice that it is coming onto the screen anytime now. There it is. So that's working the way it should. And this is for the first 10% of the animation, making sure everything is set to straight, which it is. Now we are ready to work on this second piece. So backing out to 182, let's go to its animation, apply some of the same stuff, our loop, complex animation, E set to straight with return. Go ahead and set your duration. Now here's some things we have to keep in mind for this one. For this 180 piece, we actually have a 90-degree bend here and one here, so we want this part of the path to be drawn for 20% of the entire animation. Remember, each 90-degree bend is going to represent 10% of our animation. So we have one here and one here. But we don't want this to start until this part over here has been completed. This is where things get a little bit tricky. Let me go to my animator, and at 0%, let's set the rotation to negative 180. Just going to add that and let's check it. So now we have this piece down here. And I want it to remain here because it's going to be hidden once we apply our rectangles with the clips. And we want it to stay here until this little part right here, this 91, completes its animation, which is the first 10%. So back in our animator, we're going to come and add at 10%. We don't want anything to happen to this 182 for the first 10% of our animation. So I'm going to go set its rotate to negative 180. This is going to keep everything still for the first 10% of the animation. Now we want it to rotate back to its original position, which technically is going to be 0 degrees, but we want it to take an additional 20% since there are two 90-degree bends on this 180 piece. I know that's a lot of numbers getting thrown at you, but let me just go ahead and show you this. At 30%, we want the rotate to go to 0. Let's add that and let's check it. Now, since this is going the wrong way, notice this is drawn, but it's rotating the wrong way. Quick fix for that. Instead of rotate negative 180, let's rotate positive 180. So I'm going to come in here and adjust both of those. Now let's check it and see. You see this? Watch this one. It's going to draw on, and then that one draws on. Now, it doesn't quite look right because we don't have our clips applied yet, but everything is working exactly the way it should be. Now, speaking of clips, let's go ahead and add a rectangle up here to clip this 182 piece so that we can see that the path is getting drawn correctly. Now, some things to keep in mind here to make our math and our adjustments easier. The width of 182 is 400. The position of that circle slice is -20 for the X offset, 60 for the Y offset, and it's anchored at the top. Keeping those things in mind, let's add a rectangle that has some of those same characteristics. So coming to a rectangle, let's make sure we set its width to the same as our circle slice, which was 400. The height only needs to be half of that, which is essentially the radius of our circle slice. Now this looks like it's off center, but that's okay. Let's go to the paint. Let's set it to semi-transparent so we can see through it. And if you recalled, our circle slice, that 182, it had an X offset of -20 and a Y offset of 60. And this fits that circle slice perfectly inside of there. So everything lines up nice with these numbers. Now if we go to FX for this rectangle, mask, clip next module, let's back out of here. Let's take that clip next module and let's drag it to where we are clipping the 182. Now you can see that it's animating on, and now it's about to animate off, animating on, give it a few seconds to come back around, and it's animating off. Now, why is it animating on and off the way it is? Well, for the animations for all of these circle slices for the complex animation, we have it set to straight with return. So it's going to be returning back to where it came from. That is very important. All right, so now let's work on this 93, and let's bear in mind some percents. We got 10, 20, 30. We want this 93 to animate from 30% to 40%. A way to speed this up, let's go into that 182. Let's take that animation, that complex animation, let's copy. Let's come back to 93, go to its animation, and let's paste that in. With that, we are carrying over the loop, the complex animation, the straight with return. We are even carrying over the duration. I think that's something new in a recent update to Kustom. It's actually copying over those codes. But anyway, again, we said from 30 to 40. Now maybe you're starting to see this pattern here. So from 0 to 30, we don't want anything to happen with this 90-degree bend. I'm going to come in here and delete this 10% one. Now we don't want it to be a 180 degrees because this is not a 180 degree circle slice. This is a 90 degree circle slice. So let's set that to 90. And even up to 30%, we also want it to be 90 as well. This is going to keep it still. And then at 40% is where we want it to rotate back to its original position. So let's set that to 0. Let's add that. And again, from 0 to 30, that's the first part of that curve getting drawn. And then this little 90-degree bend, 10% of our animation is going to go from 30% to 40%, 90 degrees back to 0 degrees. Now everything is good. We can still see this little piece right here. We see it up there, and we don't want that. We need to clip it. And with some of those properties in mind, if we go add a square, we don't need a rectangle because this is just a 90-degree bend. For this square, we only need it to be the width of the radius, which is going to be 200 because it had a width of 400. The radius will be 200. Going to set its paint to a semi-transparent color so we can see through it. And bearing in mind some of those positions from earlier, -20 on the X and 60 on the Y, now clearly that does not put this square down here. But what we want to do is we want to move this square down another 200 units. And to the left, another 100 units, which is half of the radius. Moving it down 200 more units to 260. Moving it to the left, 100 units. This should be perfect. Notice that little region is fitting inside of that square. So let's go to FX, Mask, Clip Next Module, back out of here, and let's take that and put it to where it's clipping the 93, which would be right here. Let's save that and apply it. And you can see that it is animating on. Give it a little bit of time to complete all the rest of it, and then it animates off. That is perfect. So I'm pretty much going to continue this process on. We got 10, 20, 30, 40. This needs to go from 40 to 60. Let's go into the 93. Let's copy that animation. Go into the 184 and let's paste it. And let's change a few things. We want this thing to remain still for the first 40%. So I'm going to delete that 30%. And since this is a 180 piece, and we also have to bear in mind rotation, like are we going clockwise or counterclockwise? We're actually changing the rotation from a counterclockwise rotation to a clockwise rotation. And since this is a 180 piece, let's set that to negative 180. I think this is going to be right. We want it to remain at negative 180 for the first 40%. And since this is a 180 piece, at 60% is where I want it to come back around to 0 degrees. Because we have two 90-degree pieces inside of this big circle slice that we have. Let's check that out. That looks good. Perfect. Now we need to clip this part over here so we don't see it. And to do that, I'm going to check out that 184. And since this width is 640, I want to put a 640 piece right here. 640 by 320 should do it. Of course, you don't have to get these numbers perfect, but you do want that shape to line up perfectly. So I'm going to add a rectangle. I want the height to be 640. We can actually make the width half of that, 320. Let's make the paint semi-transparent. Let's position this in the center of the screen. And with the position at 140, we can see that this circle slice is fitting inside of here perfectly. And let's just go ahead and test that with a clip next module. Taking that and sliding it above the 184 piece, so we're clipping it. And let's go ahead and save and have a look. So everything is looking good there. So if you made it this far, kudos to you. Many people don't even watch a 20-minute tutorial, but it is very methodical what I'm doing here. And what I'm going to do now is just pretty much, I'm not going to talk through the rest of it. I'm going to speed through it. I want you to click on the little gear icon at the bottom of the YouTube video to slow me down so that you can see that I'm really just going to be copying and pasting, changing some of these percentages, and we're going to have this completed path right here in a few seconds. Now this part here, what I want to do, since I've already clipped the 93 and this one down here is very similar, I want to come to that clip for the 93. I want to copy, paste, and check this out. All we have to do is come to the position and set this to bottom. And it should be in the exact same spot. That's perfect. Now let's make sure you take that clip and you drag it above that 95. And now we should be clipping. You can see a little spot right there where it looks like it's not clipping. Let's save that and check it out. It's perfect. Everything's good. No problems here on the home screen. All right, continuing on. And now a clip for this guy right here. We can take the 95 clip, this one that's right over here. We can copy and paste, and let's take that shape, and we can probably set this position to bottom right, I think. And then take the X offset so that we have this square completely inside of here, and that should be perfect. Make sure we apply that to the correct spot, right above the 97 there. Save it and check it out. So now that this is finally completed, we can go back in and change the duration. Let's slow this down, and I'm going to set it up to 200. With it set to 200, it's going to take 20 seconds to complete the whole thing. It's going to take 10 seconds to go one way and 10 seconds to return. Now I set it to 20 so that you could see that this right here, it does speed up in that part. So you would have to go in there and adjust those two percentages using some circumferences, a little bit of geometry, if you actually wanted the same exact speed throughout the whole animation. But let's say you take that duration and you crank it down to half of it, it's not going to be as noticeable. You can still see that it does speed up through that spot. But again, there you have it. That is an animated path. It's really just a bunch of circle slices, a bunch of clips, and some animations, complex animations that is, with us adjusting the appropriate percentages and rotations. If you have any questions, leave a comment below. And that's it for this video. I hope it helped.